My name is John Passfield, and the title of this reading will be John and Dickens, Video 30, The Reflective Journal. Now, here is my novella, John and Dickens, A Christmas Mystery, a novella by John Passfield, but I'm not going to read from the novella in this video presentation. Instead, I will read from the journal, which I wrote while polishing the rough draft of the novella. The journal is called The Making of John and Dickens, A Christmas Mystery. It's available for free on my website, which is johnpassfield.ca, johnpassfield.ca. So I'm just going to hold this up. This is about the only physical copy of this journal, The Making of John and Dickens, A Christmas Mystery. And that's a version of the cover, so that cover is sort of working its way towards what will be the cover of the novella. You work on a planning notebook and a journal as a means of working your way towards a complete novel or novella. So that's a physical copy, but the electronic copy, I guess you'd call it, is on my website. If you click on that icon, you get the book to read. Okay, now, a reflective journal for me is a journal of response to the reading of a rough draft of a novel or novella when the complete rough draft, every word, is in place and I'm polishing the text, usually over the course of a month or 6 weeks. When the novel or novella is as good as I can make it, I stop writing the journal, sign off on the planning notebook, and send the manuscript of the novel or novella to my publisher. This journal, the Dickens Journal, was written from August 22nd, 2022 to August 29th, 2022 and is 26,000 words. I will read 5 passages from that journal in this video presentation. So, here's the first passage. The topic of a Charles Dickens novella, A Christmas Carol, seems to have interested me in 3 different ways in the past few years, only one of which led to this novella, John and Dickens, A Christmas Mystery. In December of 2019, when I was writing my novel, L.M. Montgomery, I Gave You Life, it occurred to me that it would be an interesting exercise to compress the imagery of 3 classic novellas, one of which was Dickens's A Christmas Carol. The idea was that compressing the imagery of a classic work of literary art and interfusing it with my own response imagery would be an excellent exercise in the imagining and writing of imagery. So, creating work of art, a novella based on a work of art, someone else's novella, Dickens's in this case. This project still interests me and has remained as a future possibility since that time. Now, the second idea about Dickens, A Christmas Carol, occurred to me in the fall of 2022, and that was that I might write a Christmas story involving Santa Claus, which would provide perhaps a popular novella for me to publish. So, just as Dickens is visited by the ghost, I'd be visited by Santa Claus. Well, I didn't do anything with that idea. The Dickens connection was merely that Dickens had written a very popular book on that topic. Okay, the third idea was the one that led directly to this novella, that I would find myself in a room with Charles Dickens, who would be negotiating with his characters for permission to write his novella, A Christmas Carol. Once I had the third idea, I was able to write my Dickens novella. Okay, now I'm going to hold something up here. I mentioned I was working on a novel and was getting ideas about Dickens. Well, that novel is complete. It's now published. L.M. Montgomery, I Gave You Life, the author of Anne of Green Gables. So as Dickens has trouble writing A Christmas Carol, Ella Montgomery had trouble writing her books, not just Anne of Green Gables, but other books about Anne, her major character. Okay. The second passage I'm taking from the journal to read is this. I would say that the most interesting concept about Dickens, A Christmas Carol, for me, is that there's a main character who is shown scenes. I would call them image scenes, which are purported to be of great significance to his past, present, and future life. Now, in the Dickens novella, the concept is presented in a rather straightforward manner. The image scenes are familiar to the main character, Scrooge, as they are scenes from his early, present, and potentially future life, and the image scenes are explained to Scrooge by a guide. Actually, 3 ghost guides who take turns doing the explaining. So the meaning of the image scenes in A Christmas Carol is not in doubt, either to the guides, to the main character, Scrooge, nor to the reader of the novella. Nor, I might add, is the meaning of the image scenes in doubt to the author, Charles Dickens. On such a basic idea, I had already played a number of variations in my recent novels. So the meaning is explained, well, I play variations on that. In the novel which I wrote before, I began my series of 3 novellas, Shakespeare and Cleopatra, My Life Is Not My Own. I played variations on the standard pattern of a wise guide who shows image scenes to the main character and who provides commentary which leaves no doubt as to the meaning of those image scenes. So, I played variations on the idea of a guide. I played variations on the idea of explaining everything. This is the standard pattern as we see it in Dante's Inferno, where with Virgil explaining the meaning of each image scene to Dante. This strikes me as a standard pattern in most classical items of literature. Perhaps, though, I take my cue from such a writer as Conrad, as with the presentation of the image scenes that Marlowe comes across in Lord Jim and Heart of Darkness, I do not provide a guide who explains the meaning of the scenes to the main character. It is always clear, though, in Conrad where the information with which to think has come from. What to think about it is always the question. Perhaps my innovation in my novels and novellas is that it's not clear who or what is showing the image scenes, nor is the main character given any indication by anything other than his or her imagination as to what the meaning of these image scenes might be. So more mystery, less clarity in Conrad, and more mystery, less clarity in my novels and novellas. So I did mention this. Another novel I was working on as I was getting ideas about Dickens. So out of books comes books. Say you're working on a book, you get an idea for another book. It draws on the book you're working on thematically, but it's going to have a very different surface, different characters, different setting, and so on. So the book that I was working on before I came up with the Dickens novella is this, Shakespeare and Cleopatra, My Life Is Not My Own. This is in manuscript. It's held together with elastics. It has been submitted to my publisher, but has not yet been published. This is a mummy. The light comes out of the stripes, I guess we could say, the bandages, in different ways. One from a blue-eyed side of the mummy and one from a brown-eyed side of the mummy. So Shakespeare and Cleopatra. I'll leave it at that. Okay. Let's go on to the third passage then. I'm taking from the Dickens Journal. The concept that turned out to be this novella, John and Dickens, A Christmas Mystery, came to me on Wednesday, January 5th, 2022. In that note, I considered the idea of writing 2 novellas, in each of which I would meet a writer as he's writing a classic of literature. The 2 writers were to be Charles Dickens, who would be writing A Christmas Carol, and Lewis Carroll, who would be writing Alice in Wonderland. It's obvious to me now that this idea occurred to me as a direct result of having just completed, just before I wrote Cleopatra, My Life Is Not My Own, in which Cleopatra meets a writer who is writing a classic piece of literature to play Antony and Cleopatra. So parallels, Dickens is writing A Christmas Carol, Lewis Carroll is writing Alice in Wonderland, Shakespeare is writing Cleopatra. In each case, they have visitors. Me in 2 of those cases. Okay. The interesting thing about that concept is that Cleopatra, my character, is the historical Cleopatra, who by some strange process has been allowed to visit the writer who intends to change her from an historical personage to a character in a play. So I could say that this novella, John and Dickens, A Christmas Mystery, is directly derived from that novella. Okay, so having mentioned an idea for a Lewis Carroll novella. Here it is. It is complete. This again is a manuscript. It's been submitted to my publisher. It's waiting to be published. So John's in his backyard. A door opens up in the grass. Some characters poke their heads out. He realizes who they are. They're the characters from Alice in Wonderland. He is sucked down into the hole in the grass in his backyard, and he ends up in Wonderland. So Wonderfall. John and Lewis Carroll, Wonderfall. I also mentioned that I wrote a first novella, which was John and Santa, the cowboy shirt. So as I work on some books, I get ideas for other books. That's the main point there. But I show those in case you're interested. The ones that are published are on Amazon and at my publisher's website, and the others will be published within a reasonable time, I guess you'd say. Okay, number 4, the 4th section from this journal. I can also say that this novella, John and Dickens, A Christmas Mystery, is derived from my novel, my 24th novel, Ellen Montgomery, I Gave You Life. I've already shown that. In that novel, a main character who is already a character in a novel meets the author who created her in the original novel, Anne of Green Gables, and who has a plan to write more novels with Anne as a character. The duet is harmony, duel is disharmony. Between the two, the writer and the character, concerns the future of the character, which is within the power of the writer to decide. However, the character hopes to have input as to whether she will be kept as an adolescent in future Anne novels, or whether she'll be allowed to have the arc of a normal growth to an adult. So here's Anne, the character, speaking to the author, Ellen Montgomery, and saying, please give me a full arc of life, just like a human. Don't have me remain a character who is a child in book after book after book. So as I can see, as I look back over a number of my novels, that this novella, John and Dickens, A Christmas Mystery, draws on concepts and themes that have been running through the earlier books of mine, probably more than I'm aware of as I write this note. I suppose I could say that I feel fortunate that I can move from what seems like a disparate topic to disparate topic, and yet still feel that I'm always writing a John Passfield novel or novella. The surfaces are different. Shakespeare and Cleopatra are very different from Dickens and Ebenezer Scrooge, but it's still the same ideas being explored. The realization that I carry themes from novel to novel while I'm playing variations on surface imagery reassures me that my entire creative writing career is all of a piece thematically. Okay, the 5th section taken from this Dickens journal is this. It's interesting. There's a very long note in the planning notebook of Wednesday, January 8, 2022, in which there's a mixture of elements which made their way into the novella and elements which did not make their way into the novella. I didn't know at the time which elements I would use and which I wouldn't use, but it's interesting now to look back. I seem to have assumed that I would go along with the idea that a person is led by a guide through various scenes, and this is true in this novella. However, in the completed novella, only one category of scenes is shown by a main character to another. The scenes of Dickens's rehearsals with his Christmas Carol characters. There's no guide in the scenes of Dickens's childhood. I seem to have had the idea that John would see Dickens surrounded by his characters quite early in the planning, and this idea held up. I see that I had Dickens refer to a voice that told him that John would be coming, but there's no indication of this in the novella. So some things are discarded. They don't make it into the book. In the same note, I came up with the idea that the Dickens characters would be suspicious of John, would see him as an interloper, and this became the basis of the plot reversal at the end of the told story. So a minor item becomes a very major item, almost gives you the whole story in terms of the plot. In looking over my early notes, excuse me, I'm wondering whether there's any indication as to whether Dickens is being nefarious at all, as there seems to be in what I would call the second stage of the notes, and which was erased in my mind in what I'd call the third stage of the notes. So a novel or novella idea goes through stages, and sometimes you disregard, almost like a rocket dropping off its earlier stages, earlier propulsion system. You drop some of these ideas and move on without them, and there they are stuck in your early notes. It remains as a possibility, of course, but it ceased to be a certainty as the novella was idea developed and written. So those are the 5 passages I've chosen to read from a Dickens novella. Here's a general summary of what I've just read. A journal for me is a look back and a look forward. As I review the text of a just completed novel or novella, while asking myself whether there are better words than the ones on the page, I consider the books that I've written in the past. What from those books can I develop in order to make the form and the technique of my future books better than they would otherwise be? I also ask myself what topics I could explore for future books and what techniques and variations of techniques could I use to tell the stories of those topics. I am now working on my 36th creative book, 29 novels and 7 novellas, and I know for sure that they would not have been as good as they are without the practice of writing a journal of review as I polish each completed novel or novella. So, once again, this is my novella. This is what came out of all that planning and thinking. John and Dickens, A Christmas Mystery. So it's available on Amazon. It's available at my publisher's website, Rocks Mills Press, and at my website, johnpassville.ca. 2 free books just for clicking on the cover icon, the planning notebook that led to the novella, and the journal, the reflective journal that I wrote while reviewing the novella, while I was polishing the novella. Lastly, I'll say thank you for watching this video.